Have you ever wondered why the deepest wounds in your life often come from those closest to you? The people who know your morning routine, your favorite coffee mug, the way you fold your clothes, they're often the ones who break your heart in ways that strangers never could. I want to tell you about Sarah. Back in 2012, she sat right where you are, in a room much like this one, clutching a tissue and fighting back tears. Her story haunted me because it could be any of our stories. Her husband of 15 years, the man who knew every line on her face, every dream in her heart, had betrayed her trust in the most fundamental way. Not with another woman, not with gambling or addiction, but with something far more subtle and pervasive, emotional abandonment. You see, Sarah's husband knew her greatest fear was being left alone. He knew it because on their third date, she'd tearfully confessed how her father had walked out on Christmas morning when she was 9. She'd shared this precious piece of her soul, this vulnerable truth. And years later, he used that very knowledge to hurt her in ways that cut deeper than any physical wound could. When they argued, he would go silent for days, knowing that his silence was a knife twisting in that old childhood wound. He would pack a bag and leave it by the door, a subtle threat that played on her deepest fears. The person who knew her best knew exactly how to hurt her worst. But here's the question that changed everything for Sarah, and it's the question I want you to hold in your heart tonight. Why do we give those who hurt us the most such intimate access to our souls in the first place? The answer might surprise you, and it's going to change the way you look at every relationship in your life. You see, the people who hurt us the most trust us the most, and paradoxically, we trust them the most too. It's a dance of vulnerability that's as old as human connection itself. Let me share something that might seem strange at first. The ability to hurt someone deeply is actually a privilege. Yes, you heard that right. It's a sign that someone has let you into the sacred space of their heart, has shown you their unguarded self, has trusted you with their tender spots. Back in 2008, I met a man named Robert in a small coffee shop in Detroit. He was a successful businessman, always impeccably dressed, seemingly having it all together. But as we talked over steaming cups of coffee, he shared something that would later become one of the most powerful illustrations of this principle I've ever encountered. Robert told me about his young son, Tommy, who was born with a rare medical condition. Every night, Robert had to help Tommy through an extremely painful physical therapy routine. Night after night, he would have to cause his beloved child pain in order to help him heal. And every night, despite the pain, Tommy would look up at him with complete trust in his eyes. The hardest part, Robert told me, his voice breaking, isn't causing him pain. The hardest part is that he trusts me to do it. He believes in me so completely that even when I'm hurting him, he knows it's for his good. Sometimes that trust feels heavier than any burden I've ever carried. This story illustrates something profound about human nature. Those who trust us the most are often the ones we have the power to hurt the most deeply. Think about your own life for a moment. Who has the power to hurt you the most? Is it the stranger on the street? The casual acquaintance? Or is it the person who knows your dreams, your fears, your secret hopes? You see, trust and vulnerability go hand in hand. When someone trusts us deeply, they show us their vulnerable places, their insecurities, their dreams, their deepest fears. And in doing so, they give us a map to their heart, including all the places where a wound would hurt the most. But here's where it gets interesting. And this vulnerability isn't just about the potential for pain, it's also about the capacity for profound healing and connection. When someone trusts us with their vulnerability, they're also giving us the power to help them heal, to support their growth, to be a catalyst for their transformation. In 2010, I worked with a group of veterans who were struggling with PTSD. One of them, James, shared something that perfectly captures this paradox. He said, "The only people who can really help me heal are the ones who I trust enough to let see me at my worst. And showing them my worst means giving them the power to hurt me the most." This brings us to a crucial understanding. The people who hurt us the most aren't usually strangers or enemies. They're the ones we've given permission to see our authentic selves. They're the ones we've trusted with our true nature, our deepest vulnerabilities, our most cherished dreams. Think about your closest relationships right now. These are the people who know when you're putting on a brave face. They know what keeps you up at night. They know your insecurities, your fears, your deepest desires. And yes, this means they have the capacity to hurt you in ways that others simply cannot. But here's the beautiful truth. The same dynamic that makes us vulnerable to deep hurt also creates the possibility for profound healing and connection. The very fact that someone can hurt us deeply is evidence that we've opened ourselves to authentic relationship, to real intimacy, to genuine connection. I remember working with a couple in 2014. Let's call them Michael and Lisa. They came to me on the brink of divorce, both hurting deeply from years of accumulated wounds. But as we worked together, they began to understand something profound. The depth of their pain was actually a measure of the depth of their connection. You see, Michael couldn't have hurt Lisa so deeply if she hadn't trusted him with her authentic self. Lisa couldn't have wounded Michael so profoundly if he hadn't shared his vulnerable places with her. The very depth of their hurt was evidence of how much they had invested in each other, how much they had trusted each other, how deeply they had allowed themselves to connect. This realization changed everything for them. Instead of seeing their pain as evidence that their relationship was broken, they began to see it as a sign of how much they had invested in each other. They began to understand that their capacity to hurt each other was actually a reflection of how much they had trusted each other with their true selves. And this brings us to a crucial question. If the people who hurt us the most are often the ones we trust the most, what does this mean for how we handle our relationships? How do we navigate this paradox of vulnerability and trust? The truth is, many of us respond to being hurt by building walls. We think we're protecting ourselves, but what we're really doing is cutting ourselves off from the very connections that have the power to heal us. I learned this lesson in the most unexpected way from a woman I met in 2007 at a retreat in Arizona. Maria was a successful attorney who prided herself on being bulletproof. After her divorce, she had systematically eliminated every possibility of being hurt again. She lived alone, worked long hours, kept her relationship superficial, and convinced herself that she was happy this way. I don't need anyone close enough to hurt me, she told me with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. But here's what Maria didn't realize. In protecting herself from pain, she had also walled herself off from joy. You can't selectively numb emotion. When you build a wall against pain, you also block out love, connection, and the deep satisfaction that comes from being truly known and accepted by another human being. You see, there's a profound irony in our attempts to protect ourselves from hurt. The more we try to become invulnerable, the more we diminish our capacity for authentic connection. And it's in those authentic connections, yes, the very ones that make us vulnerable to being hurt, that we find our greatest joy, our deepest healing, and our most profound sense of being alive. Let me share something that might challenge your thinking. The people who hurt you the most aren't necessarily the ones who don't care about you. Often, they're the ones who care so much that they've let their guard down completely with you. They've shown you their own brokenness, their own fears, their own inadequacies. And sometimes it's from that place of shared vulnerability that the deepest wounds emerge. I remember working with a father and son in 2013. The son, Alex, was furious with his father for missing his high school graduation. He said something that stopped me in my tracks. If he didn't care at all, it wouldn't hurt this much. It hurts because I know he loves me and he still wasn't there. The depth of our hurt often correlates directly with the depth of the connection we share with someone. When a stranger is rude to us, we might feel annoyed or angry for a moment, but when someone we trust deeply disappoints us, the pain can feel almost unbearable. But here's where it gets interesting. And this is something I've seen transform countless lives. Understanding this dynamic doesn't just help us make sense of our pain. It can actually help us heal and grow stronger through it. Think about a time when someone you trusted deeply hurt you. Now, instead of focusing on the hurt itself, consider what that pain tells you about the depth of your connection with that person. The fact that they could hurt you so deeply means you had the courage to be vulnerable, the strength to trust, the capacity to love deeply. In 2011, I worked with a group of people recovering from various forms of betrayal. One participant shared a perspective that changed the entire room. I used to think my pain was a sign of weakness, that I had been foolish to trust so completely. Now I see it differently. My pain is evidence of my capacity to love, to trust, to connect deeply. And that's not weakness, that's strength. This brings us to a fundamental truth about human relationships. The capacity to be hurt deeply and the capacity to love deeply are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without the other. The question isn't how to avoid being hurt. It's how to remain open to love despite knowing that hurt is possible. Every time someone trusts you with their vulnerability, they're not just sharing their weaknesses. They're sharing their humanity. They're saying, here I am, imperfect and real, hoping you'll accept me anyway. And when we respond to that trust with our own vulnerability, we create the possibility for genuine connection. I worked with a couple in 2015 who taught me something profound about this dynamic. They've been married for 30 years. And when I asked them the secret to their lasting relationship, the wife said something remarkable. We decided early on that the risk of being hurt was worth the reward of being truly known. This is the paradox at the heart of deep relationships. The very thing that makes us vulnerable to being hurt, our willingness to be seen and known deeply, is also what makes genuine connection possible. The people who can hurt us the most are often the ones who've seen us at our most authentic, our most vulnerable, our most real. But here's where many of us get stuck. We focus so much on the potential for pain that we forget about the potential for growth, healing, and transformation that comes from deep trust. Yes, the people who trust you the most can hurt you the most, but they can also help you heal in ways that no one else can. Think about the most significant healing experiences in your life. Chances are they involve someone you trusted deeply, someone who had seen your wounds and still chose to stay, someone who knew your failures and still believed in you, someone who had witnessed your darkness and still saw your light. This is why the people who hurt us the most often end up being the ones who help us grow the most. They've seen our vulnerabilities, they know our patterns, they understand our fears, and this intimate knowledge gives them the unique ability to either wound us deeply or help us heal profoundly. I remember working with a mother and daughter in 2009. The daughter had been struggling with addiction, and her mother had been there through every painful step of her recovery. One day, the daughter said something that perfectly captured this dynamic. My mom knows exactly what to say to break my heart, but she also knows exactly what to say to help it heal. And somehow that makes both the pain and the healing more real. Crucial. How do we maintain our capacity for trust and vulnerability in a world where hurt is inevitable? How do we keep our hearts open when we know that the people we trust the most have the power to hurt us the most deeply? The answer lies in understanding something profound about the nature of trust. Trust isn't about finding people who will never hurt you. It's about finding people who are worth the risk of being hurt. And more importantly, it's about becoming someone who is worthy of others' trust, even knowing that you might unintentionally hurt them too. Let me share a story that changed my entire perspective on this. In 2005, I met a Holocaust survivor named Rachel. She was in her 80s then, and what struck me most wasn't her story of survival, though that was remarkable, but rather her capacity to still trust and love deeply after experiencing such profound betrayal and loss. I asked her how she managed to keep her heart open after everything she'd been through. Her answer was simple but revolutionary. The people who hurt me took so much from me, she said. I refused to let them take my capacity to love and trust as well. That would have meant they won completely. This brings us to a crucial understanding. When we close ourselves off from trust because we're afraid of being hurt, we're actually continuing the work that those who hurt us began. We're finishing what they started. We're turning their momentum power to hurt us into a permanent barrier against love and connection. Think about that for a moment. Really let it sink in. You see, the people who hurt you the most trust you with their truth, their fears, their inadequacies, their brokenness, and yes, sometimes they weaponize the vulnerability you've shown them. But here's what's fascinating. Even in hurting you, they're demonstrating a profound trust in you. They trust that you can handle their worst behavior. They trust that you're strong enough to bear their darkness. I worked with a man named David. in 2014 who had been emotionally abusive to his wife for years. During therapy, he had a breakthrough when he realized something startling. I showed her my worst self because somewhere deep down, I trusted that she was strong enough to handle it. I trusted her more than I trusted myself. This insight doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it helps us understand something vital about human relationships. Even in conflict, even in pain, there's often a deep current of trust flowing beneath the surface. The question is, how do we honor that trust while protecting ourselves from harm? The answer lies in what I call conscious vulnerability. This means choosing to remain open while being mindful of how and with whom we share our deepest selves. It means understanding that trust isn't an all-or-nothing proposition. It's a graduated process that we can navigate with wisdom and intention. When someone shows you their broken places, their shameful moments, their darkest thoughts, they're not just sharing information, they're sharing their trust in your capacity to hold that vulnerability with care. And when they hurt you, they're often acting from their own place of brokenness, trusting that your love is strong enough to withstand their storm. I remember working with a group of parents in 2012 whose adult children were struggling with addiction. My daughter stole from me, lied to me, broken my heart 1,000 times. But even in her worst moments, she comes to me. She trusts me to love her through it. And somehow that trust makes the pain both harder and more meaningful. This brings us to a fundamental truth about deep relationships. They're not about avoiding pain. They're about creating enough trust and safety that we can help each other heal from our wounds, even when we're the ones who caused them. In 2008, I worked with a couple who'd been through multiple infidelities. What struck me was not that they chose to stay together, but how they chose to heal. I realized that the fact that my wife could hurt me so deeply meant I had loved her deeply enough to be hurt. And if I could love that deeply once, I could choose to do it again, this time with my eyes wide open. You see, the people who hurt you the most trust you with their authentic selves, including their capacity for causing pain. They trust you to see them at their worst and still hold space for their best. They trust you with their shadows, believing that your light is strong enough to help guide them home. This is where real healing begins, not in pretending the hurt never happened, but in understanding that the very depth of the hurt is evidence of the depth of the connection. And that connection, painful as it might sometimes be, is what makes life rich and meaningful. Consider a garden. The same soil that allows the deepest roots to grow is also the soil that can harbor the most destructive weeds. But we don't stop planting gardens because weeds might grow. Instead, we learn to tend our relationships with more wisdom, more intention, more understanding. I worked with a woman named Claire in 2013 who had been deeply hurt by her best friend of 20 years. I realized that my friend could hurt me so deeply because I had allowed her to plant her roots so deeply in my heart. And yes, sometimes those roots get tangled and cause pain, but they've also helped me grow in ways I never could have grown alone. This brings us to an essential question about trust and vulnerability. How do we remain open to deep connection while still protecting our hearts? How do we navigate the paradox of needing both vulnerability and boundaries? The answer isn't in building walls. It's in developing discernment. It's in understanding that trust is earned gradually, tested repeatedly, and maintained mindfully. It's in recognizing that the people who hurt you the most often trust you the most with their own brokenness, their own struggles, their own journey toward healing. Think about the people in your life right now who have the power to hurt you deeply. Instead of seeing that power as a threat, what if you saw it as evidence of the depth of your connection? What if you saw their capacity to hurt you as a reflection of how much you've dared to love, to trust, to connect? This doesn't mean accepting abuse or tolerating harmful behavior. Rather, it means understanding that in deep relationships, hurt is sometimes inevitable. Not because anyone is inherently cruel, but because we're all human, all learning, all carrying our own wounds while trying to avoid wounding others. In 2010, I worked with a family torn apart by decades of unspoken hurts. The breakthrough came when the youngest daughter said, Maybe we keep hurting each other because we're the only ones we trust enough to be this honest with, even when This brings us to a crucial turning point in our understanding. The moment we realize that the depth of our hurt isn't just a measure of our pain. It's a measure of our capacity for connection. And this capacity, this ability to remain open despite knowing we might get hurt, is one of the most powerful forces for healing and transformation in our lives. Let me share a story that illustrates this perfectly. In 2004, I met a woman named Grace who had survived an emotionally abusive marriage. What made her story remarkable wasn't just her survival, but what she did with her pain. Instead of closing herself off, she started a support group for other survivors. She told me, I realized that the depth of my hurt gave me the depth of understanding to help others heal. This is a profound truth about human connection. Our wounds, when properly understood and processed, become wellsprings of wisdom and healing. Not just for ourselves, but for others. The very experiences that hurt us the most often become the source of our greatest contributions to others' healing. Think about the people who have helped you through your darkest times. Chances are they weren't people who had lived perfect, painless lives. They were people who had been wounded, who had suffered, who had learned to heal. They were people who understood pain intimately enough to help you navigate through yours. I remember working with a group of teachers in 2015 who were dealing with troubled students. One teacher shared something that stopped everyone in their tracks. The students who trust me enough to act out in my class are often the ones who need me the most. Their disruption isn't just bad behavior, it's a cry for someone strong enough to handle their chaos and still love them through it. Sight reveals something crucial about trust and pain. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are actually crying out for help in the only way they know how. They trust us enough to show us their brokenness, their fear, their desperate need for connection, even if that showing comes through behaviors that cause. We confuse where many of us get stuck. We confuse forgiveness with forgetting, healing with denial, trust with blindness. Real healing isn't about pretending the hurt never happened. It's about understanding why it happened, learning from it, and choosing how to move forward with greater wisdom and intentionality. In 2006, I worked with a father who had been estranged from his son for 15 years. When they finally reconnected, the son said something profound. I stayed away because I trusted you enough to know you'd still be there when I was ready to come back. I trusted your love more than I trusted my anger. This brings us to a fundamental truth about deep relationships. The people who hurt us the most often trust us with their whole selves, not just their best parts, but their shadows, their struggles, their unfinished healing. And in that trust, even when it manifests as hurt, lies the potential for profound transformation. When someone trusts you enough to show you their worst self, they're actually offering you an opportunity to demonstrate what unconditional love looks like, an opportunity to show them that they're worthy of love even when they're not perfect, an opportunity to help them heal. I worked with a couple in 2013 where the wife had betrayed her husband's trust in a significant. During their healing process, the husband said something remarkable. I realized that my wife trusted me enough to confess, to show me her shame, to risk losing everything for the sake of truth. That trust in my capacity to handle her truth became the foundation for rebuilding our trust in each other. This is where real healing begins. In understanding that trust isn't about finding people who will never hurt us. It's about finding people who are committed to growing through the hurt, to learning from it, to using it as a catalyst for deeper connection. And think about your own journey for a moment. The people who have hurt you the most, what did they trust you with? Your love, your forgiveness, your strength, your capacity to handle their imperfection. Understanding this can transform how you view your pain and your path to healing. In 2009, I worked with a woman who had been deeply hurt by her mother's criticism throughout her life. She had an insight that changed everything. My mother trusted me with her fear of not being good enough. She projected it onto me because she trusted I was strong enough to handle what she couldn't handle herself. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it helps us understand it in a way that can lead to healing rather than continued hurt. When we understand that the people who hurt us are often trusting us with their own unhealed wounds, we can choose how to respond from a place of wisdom rather than reactive pain. The people who hurt you the most have often given you their deepest trust in paradoxical ways. They've trusted you with their fear, their inadequacy, their need, their darkness. They've trusted that your love is strong enough to contain their chaos, that your heart is big enough to hold their pain alongside your own. I remember working with a group of siblings in 2014 who were dealing with their fathers. The youngest sister said something that shifted everyone's perspective. Dad didn't show his addiction to his colleagues or friends. He trusted us with his weakness because he knew our love was strong enough to survive it. This brings us to a crucial understanding about healing. It's not about becoming invulnerable to hurt. It's about becoming strong enough to remain open to love, even knowing that love always carries the risk of pain. It's about understanding that the people who hurt us the most often trust us the most with their authentic selves, including the parts of themselves they're ashamed of, afraid of, still learning to heal. So where do we go from here? How do we take this understanding and use it to transform our relationships, our healing, and our capacity for love? The answer begins with a radical shift in perspective. Instead of asking, why do the people I trust keep hurting me? Start asking, what are these people trusting me with? Because often, beneath the surface of every hurt is a profound, if paradoxical, expression of trust. I remember a breakthrough moment with a young woman in 2015. After years of struggling with her mother's emotional volatility, she suddenly understood something profound. My mother trusts me with her unfinished growing up. Every time she acts out, she's trusting that I'm mature enough to handle what she never learned to handle herself. This understanding doesn't eliminate the pain, but it transforms it into something meaningful. It turns wounds into wisdom, scars into strength, hurt into healing, not just for ourselves, but for others who are walking similar paths. Think about the most painful relationship in your life right now. What if, beneath all the hurt, that person is trusting you with something essential about their own journey? What if they're trusting you with their unfinished healing, their unmet needs, their desperate attempts to be loved? In 2007, I worked with a man who had been emotionally distant from his children for years. During a particularly powerful session, he broke down and said, I trusted them to survive my absence because I didn't trust myself to be present. I gave them my biggest wound, the wound of unavailability that I inherited from my own father. This is the deeper truth about why the people who hurt you trust you the most. They trust you with their unhealed parts, their broken places, their deepest needs. They trust you to survive their imperfection. They trust you to hold space for their growth, even when that growth comes at a cost to you. But being this dynamic doesn't mean accepting abuse or tolerating harmful behavior. Instead, it means developing the wisdom to recognize the difference between someone who trusts you with their healing journey and someone who's using trust as a weapon. I worked with a couple in 2012 who taught me something profound about this distinction. After years of cyclical conflict, the wife had an insight. When my husband shares his fears and insecurities with me, even if he does it through anger, he's trusting me with his vulnerability. But when he uses my vulnerabilities against me, he's betraying both my trust and his own integrity. This brings us to a crucial point. The goal isn't to become more tolerant of hurt. It's to become more discerning about the difference between the pain of growth and the pain of abuse. It's about learning to recognize when someone is trusting you with their healing process versus when they're exploiting your trust for their own protection. So every time someone trusts you enough to show you their authentic self, including their capacity for causing pain, they're offering you a choice to respond with wisdom rather than reaction, a choice to understand rather than judge, a choice to use the experience for growth rather than guardedness. In 2003, I witnessed a powerful moment between a father and his teenage son. After a particularly heated argument, the son said something that changed their relationship forever. And Dad, I don't act out with strangers. I act out with you because I trust you'll still love me when I'm at my worst. This is the paradox at the heart of deep relationships. The people who trust us the most often show that trust through their willingness to be imperfect with us. They trust us with their anger, their fear, their inadequacy, not because they want to hurt us, but because they believe in our capacity to handle their truth. But here's the most important understanding I want to leave you with today. You have the power to transform how you respond to this trust. You can choose to see the hurt inflicted by those closest to you, not just as pain to be endured, but as an opportunity to demonstrate what real love looks like. When someone trusts you with their broken places, their unhealed wounds, their desperate attempts to be loved, they're not just sharing their pain. They're sharing their belief in your capacity for understanding, for compassion, for love that transcends perfect behavior. Remember Sarah, whom I mentioned at the beginning? 2 years after our initial meeting, she shared something profound. I realized that my husband trusted me with his worst self because he believed in my capacity for forgiveness. And while that doesn't excuse his behavior, understanding this helped me reclaim my power in the situation. This is where true transformation begins, not in denying the pain or pretending it doesn't hurt, but in understanding that the very depth of the hurt is often a measure of the depth of trust being placed in us. And in that understanding lies the seed of profound healing and growth. What if the people who hurt you most are actually trusting you with their deepest truth? What if your capacity to be hurt deeply is actually evidence of your capacity to love deeply? And most importantly, what if the path to healing isn't in building stronger walls, but in developing greater wisdom about how to handle the trust that others place in us, even when that trust comes wrapped in pain? Because in the end, the people who hurt you the most trust you the most with their authentic selves, their unfinished healing, their desperate need for love. And in understanding this truth lies the potential not just for healing, but for transformation, both yours and theirs. The question isn't whether you'll be hurt by those you trust. The question is what you'll do with that hurt, how you'll let it shape you, and whether you'll use it as a reason to close down or as an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of love that transforms lives, starting with your own.